Hey, thank you so much for joining in to our first video. I am Leah Jackson, Aloha. I am the founder and CEO of Puka Puka Creative. And got that right, Puka. What is a puka? Well, I named my company after my dog. This is Puka! But puka means whole in Hawaiian, and it also means to emerge and to rise. And I thought that would be a really good name for a creative audio studio. And what we do is we produce audio experiences and podcasts for brands. So maybe that's you. You're looking for a partner to help you get your podcast up and running, developed, and to grow your podcast. Or maybe you're just looking for some tips on how to make your podcast and your audio sound better. Well, we've got the video for you. We are coming live from sunny San Diego, and this is our studio. It's small but mighty. And we got Darth Vader, of course. Might be making a cameo at some point just to remind me to use the Force. All right, so this is our first video inside the Puka Puka studio, and we're going to be going over a lot of audio and recording, kind of basics. So this video is really for somebody that's been podcasting for a while. You know the fundamentals, you know a lot of the audio basics, but you just want to make your podcast sound better. I'm going to be going over 4 topics around recording, EQing, what it is and why you use it and how you use it, the difference between mixing and mastering, and why they are both so important. And in our 4th topic, we're going to be going over if you are using just one audio file for maybe some guest interviews and you don't have separated audio tracks for maybe yourself and your guests, I'm going to show you some tricks on how to better balance and mix and easy ways to be able to do that. All right, I'm really excited about this video, so let's go. Darth, take it away. Topic number 1. All right, so let's talk about recording. One of the best, I wouldn't say easy, but easiest way to get your audio sounding better is to set yourself up from the beginning to get better audio. And that can be done with 3 things: the microphone that you're using, the environment that you're recording in, and setting good audio levels from the beginning. Okay, so let's talk about equipment. You don't need to spend a ton of money on a microphone. See this microphone here? This is a $60 microphone on Amazon. It's a Samsung Q2U. Samsung, the son of Samsung, I think is actually what it is. The Q2U, super inexpensive, but sounds really great. If you're recording on a headset mic, telling you right now, don't do it anymore. Yes, you can do it, but does it sound good? So just invest in some better equipment. If your guests are using headsets as well, buy another microphone. This Q2U will do. Send it off to your guests and they can be able to send it back. The costs involved in that are so small, but what you're getting out of it is so huge, which is a better recording overall. All right, so let's also talk about where are you recording and where are your guests being recorded? I know this is kind of simple. So what I'd like to do with interviews is I make sure that notifications are turned off on all computers, all devices, all smartwatches, everything. And if a guest is recording around other people, just try to have them record by themselves where they're not going to be interrupted, because it's not only going to not sound as good, the interview will probably not go as well because there's going to be a lot of distractions. All right, so a couple of things you can do to make sure that somebody's audio is set at a good level from the very beginning. I like to do this for guest interviews, but also for myself every single time I'm setting up a recording. So if you're using something like Zoom, where you don't have the input gain control you would on like using a digital audio workstation, or if you're using maybe Squadcast or Riverside or something like that. This will allow you to control the input signal when your microphone is connected directly into your computer. So a lot of times what will happen is somebody will just plug in a microphone and maybe the levels are too low or they're too high. But doing this at the get-go will help you to get a better level set from the very beginning. So on a Mac, and this would obviously work on a PC as well, setting location is going to be a little bit different, but on a Mac, you would go to System Preferences, go to Sound, and then there's 3 tabs that you have on a Mac for sound effects, output, the sound that's going out of your computer. But what you're looking for here is the input settings. So your microphone is basically an input. You're inputting that sound into your computer. So I have my Samsung Q2U microphone. And as you can see right here, as I'm talking, you can see the input level notated by the darkened gray bars. And this is actually a really good level for myself. What I generally say is when you're setting up a guest interview, have them speak in their normal voice, use what I like to call the Aloha rule. Use the end of your pinky and your thumb to be about this distance away from your microphone, because the closer you get, the worse the audio sounds. So safe distance, Aloha distance. Have them speak in their normal voice, and then you're going to kind of set that input level with them. Maybe it's on a virtual interview, but go through this process with them, and that's going to really help out your recording from the very beginning. Topic number 2. Okay, so just to start, so I'm going to be using Logic, which is a digital audio workstation, but all these kind of tips and best practices are global for any other DAW that you're using. So if you're using maybe Audition or Pro Tools or Audacity, something like that, just take these and then your DAW is going to be able to do all the things that Logic is able to do. What is EQ? What does it do? Why do you need to do it? So EQ or EQing is basically equalization. And that is the process where you're boosting and cutting certain frequencies of sound. So in podcasting, we're primarily talking about voice, vocals. There's a certain frequency range that vocals have, which is about 85 to about 250 hertz. So I'm going to pull up the EQ that I use in Logic, which is a preloaded standard channel EQ. Works for me. There's tons of other EQs that you can be able to select in Logic or another DAW, but this is just the one that I use. Okay, so for this first thing that I do with vocals is, there's certain frequencies that are inaudible to the human ear, right? You're just not able to hear them. So the first thing I do is do a little cut, a low cut, as they call it, to these lower frequencies. And what cutting does is basically allowing the frequencies to fill up that space. So if there are certain frequencies that you can't hear anyway, why do you leave them in? There's no reason to. So you want to fill up the space with the frequencies that you actually can hear. So again, with vocals, about that 85 to about 250 range. And what I like to do is I like to do a little boost in about the 125, 130 hertz range. And I'll show you what that actually sounds like and what the difference is there.
I know it. Hello, and welcome to the Startup Stack. I'm your host, Louis Barrel. This week, we're taking a deep dive into the world of performance marketing with Nima Gardi.
So can you hear that difference? So I increased it. I increased that frequency about 5 decibels. And what you can hear is the lower end just sounds nice and kind of boosted. And I just think it adds a nice little tone to it. Some people do this, some people don't. It's just really user preference. Okay, so now that we boosted the kind of lower to mid range of the audio, for vocals, you want to kind of accentuate like the higher range of sound. When you boost kind of the higher range of sound, you're going to get a more natural tone to it. So what I like to do, kind of boost up about 5,000 hertz there, but I want you to kind of hear the difference between the two without that boost of the higher end.
Hello, and welcome to the Startup Stack. I'm your host, Louis Barrel. This week, we're taking a deep dive into the world of performance marketing with Nima Gardide. Nima is the founder and president of Paramill, a growth marketing studio based in the Bay Area. Growth marketing is a relatively new space in the world of tech, and one with some pretty bold claims. Unlike other forms of marketing, performance and growth shops promise to extract an exact ROI on every campaign.
So hopefully you can hear the difference a little bit. You're really going to kind of hear it with those hard consonants with like the S's and the P's. But all of this stuff is really training your ear. Listen to different podcasts. I highly recommend, like, if you're doing your own editing and mixing on your own podcasts, highly recommend kind of doing like an A/B on other podcasts that, are out there. So the last step in this is doing kind of a high cut. So again, this is kind of user preference, but vocals don't really have that much high end. So you're just kind of cutting that higher end frequency just like you are on the lower end. And so EQing is something that is not really like a set it and forget it. You definitely want to adjust depending on who is speaking. And if you're working on different audio files and different audio tracks, you actually have the ability to adjust each one of those tracks. So if someone's maybe more on the lower end versus somebody who's more on the higher end of the frequency, you want to just really listen and adjust it per that speaker. So really, to sum up, EQing is for podcasting and for vocals, you want to make that person sound as natural as possible. And EQing is a way that you're going to do that. And I would really just encourage you to open up an EQ in your DAW, play some vocals, and just play around with doing kind of weird things like over exaggerating certain frequencies. Then you're going to really help to train your ear, what sounds natural, voice natural, and what really doesn't. Topic 3. Our third topic is the difference between mixing and mastering. 2 very, very important processes that you do to make your audio sound better, way better, tons better. So mixing is part of that process. What we just covered in EQing is essentially, in a podcast, you have an audio track, maybe a music track, and you have a guest, or maybe you have some special effects that you've kind of added in there just for fun. Okay, so for example, in this project, I have about 6 different tracks. I have my own audio track. I have the host's audio track. I have the guest. I have some music and a couple of like effects tracks and whatnot. So the idea of mixing is getting all these different tracks or getting all these different sounds to be balanced and to sound good together. So how like a DJ will be playing a song and they'll be mixing in the next song, and it sounds like so natural and it sounds great and it sounds balanced, and you can hear the new song coming in, but you can still hear the song that was playing. that's in a very basic level. That's mixing. You're mixing different sounds together. You're creating a balance and you're creating the tone of each sound, like we were talking about in EQing. Okay, so in this project, with these different tracks that I have, and again, I'm using multiple tracks for this project. This is a little bit different if you are using just one track of audio, but we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So if we look in my effects kind of chain here, so each one of these tracks has different effects that, again, are going to create a different tone. So you're going to be able to equalize, you're going to be able to have some noise reduction. Maybe you are going to add a compressor on certain tracks. You're really utilizing these different effects to be able to create more balance, better tone for that sound. And you're really going to use automation to be able to level out or balance out the different levels of sound. So, when you're listening to a podcast, you have one speaker that is talking at a really great level. It's audible, you can hear them. And then you have maybe their guest is a lot quieter. Maybe they're, using a different type of microphone, like a headset microphone and whatnot. So your job is really to make all those sounds balanced and audible at the same level. And what automation does is it allows you to boost and cut certain levels of sound. So in Logic, your automation is here. I won't go into too much detail around how to use the automation, but essentially what you're seeing here is you're seeing two vocal tracks here, some music. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure that the music isn't overpowering the vocals, and I'll let you hear that here.
What's a social media marketer's favorite kind of cracker?
Oh man, that's a good one. I don't know.
Instagrams.
That's pretty good. That was one of those obvious ones, and you're like, okay, yeah.
You're like, I know this one. I know. Yeah. Hello, and welcome to the Startup Stack. I'm your.
See how the music at this level, how that isn't fighting with the vocals. So I want to let you hear what it would sound like without this kind of automation going on. So if it was sitting basically just at 0, this is what it would sound like.
I don't know.
Instagrams.
That's pretty good. That was one of those obvious ones, and you're like, okay, yeah.
You're like, I know this one. I know. Yeah. Hello, and welcome to the Startup Stack. I'm your host, Louis Farrell. This week, we're taking a deep.
So hopefully you kind of notice that difference where it's like you're trying to fight over what to listen to. Listen to the music, listen to the vocals, and what you really want, especially in podcasting, is that person that's speaking is the most important thing. And music is just kind of like a nice little bonus, something that is like in the background, especially in this case, because I'm layering vocals over music. Now, if you're in a section where maybe you just had intro music and you didn't have any vocals over it at all, then, you'd probably want to set your level, your automation level around 0. So what I like to do, especially for music that does have a lot going on, it's not just like an acoustic guitar or something like that. I usually like to set it about -4 to -5 dB. And that's a really nice place where, you're not going to get the music that's too loud going into vocals. And, it's just not a good listening experience, right? Talked about mixing. Hopefully you got a good understanding about what that is. Using effects, you're using kind of volume automation, creating that nice, balance. Yeah, you got it. Creating a nice balance and really going in and adjusting each track to make sure that tone is right, to make sure those vocals are sounding as natural as possible. So mastering is kind of like the final layer once you have done all your mixing. And some people do a whole mastering process. If you're new maybe to audio production, maybe you're not doing it, there are some simple ways that you can actually really help to make everything just sounds so much better. Okay, so in mastering, there's a couple different ways that you can kind of master audio. So the way that I do it is I don't have really anything else turned on in my mastering track other than a loudness meter, which is basically kind of how loud everything is overall. And there's a certain level that you want to hit for podcasting. And then basically just a limiter. So I'll go over those two things in a second. But also what you can kind of do is once you've done your mix, you can export maybe a WAV file or something like that, and then bring it back into a session and go ahead and just master that track specifically. So where I have all my individual tracks, I don't really need extra EQ or an extra compressor, but some people do add that in. And the reason why I don't is because my loudness level is actually set and is actually at a good level. So if I'm adding a compressor or kind of more EQ, it can change how loud everything is, and I don't want to. So if I'm monitoring just the loudness meter here,
or spend on holiday advertising, that actually it's a terrible time to be doing performance marketing because the costs are really high. How do you navigate that?
Yeah.
And for podcasting, what you're shooting for is between -14 to about -18, maybe a -19 decibels. And what that's going to do, what that level is going to show you is you are listening to one podcast, going about your day, doing whatever, and then a next podcast comes on. So if your levels are too low or they're too high, it's just not going to be a great experience when you're listening to somebody else's podcast. You're not going to be able to hear it as well. It's not going to be as audible, say, if you have it in maybe the -20 range. And then obviously it's going to be too loud if you're above that -14 decibels. So highly encourage you to use this loudness meter. It's going to really help you to just have your listeners be like, wow, this is a really great sounding podcast. Obviously, mixing and all of that and how you're recording all of that stuff plays an important part of it too. But this is just a great gauge. And then also what I have on my master track, and you can also put a limiter on each individual tracks as well. So what a limiter does is you're basically setting at a certain decibel point that your sound is not going to go over. And this is really important because, again, what we were talking about in the loudest meter is, you have each individual tracks, and, you don't want your audio to peak or to go in the red or go over and be too loud, or it's going to sound just bad and distorted, right? So a limiter will really help you to make sure that that audio is not going to go over the certain level, the certain output level. So what you're mainly looking at here is setting your output level to about -0.1 or about 0.2. I just like to give it that extra point decimal. But you're going to set that here. And that's pretty much all I use. I mean, I kind of up the gain on my limiter here, where that's going to just help it overall to be louder. And that's going to obviously affect your overall loudness. But your output level here is what you're really shooting for. Topic 4. So say you are interviewing somebody, maybe it's via Zoom, and you've only have one audio file that has yourself and the guest that you're interviewing, or you have multiple guests. So the way that Zoom does things, and they've actually changed these in the settings, is all those speakers and all those participants will be dumped into one file, which makes a audio editor or a sound designer's life a lot harder, because you really have to go in and manually adjust everyone's different levels. Everyone sounds different. They're in different environments, like we kind of talked about in the first topic. So if you haven't done this, if you are recording in Zoom, in settings, under recording settings, make sure you're checking that box to have all participants recorded in separate tracks. That is going to be a huge benefit to you, because you're going to be able to have more control over the sound of everybody in that recording. So as an example, I don't have one combined audio track, but what I'm going to show you will work for using just an individual track. All right, so the two things that you want to do to be able to really balance out everybody in your recording is using automation, which we had talked about. So you're able to really go into each part of your audio track and go and boost, certain sections of that discussion, and you can actually cut as well. So if somebody is talking and it transitions to another person and they're not loud enough, this is where you'd go in. You could be able to just manually boost that little section or that part of the conversation. So be able to get more familiar with automation. It's a huge time saver when you're doing this task specifically. And the other thing is using compression. All right, so essentially what a compressor is, what we talked about in the EQ is audio has a frequency or a spectrum of frequencies. And what a compressor does is it takes that frequency and kind of just crunches it down. So the dynamics in audio are basically kind of squashed. But the reason why you use compression is, like, for example, somebody is talking that's nice, loud, audible, but then the next person may not be as loud. It's going to boost up that less loud sounds. And maybe somebody is talking that is too loud in kind of like your overall mix. It's actually going to bring down those levels. So the things that you want to look at on a compressor is you're going to look at this input and output gain, and you want to set them equally around the same level. So if you're looking to add some compression, you'll be able to add on the input gain and on the output gain, threshold, ratio, knee, and attack. And those are the different parts of a compressor that you're really looking for. So I'm not going to go into too much. I really recommend just a Google search compression, but use your ears also. When you're compressing sounds, what happens a lot is something is over compressed and you're using too much compression. And that's basically going to take a nice sound that has a lot of dynamic range, it has a lot of lows, highs, and mids, and it's just going to flatten it. So it's not going to just sound as good. But using a compressor will help to really balance out and kind of even out the levels of your sound. All right, that was it. That was our first video. Hope you learned a ton. We hope you take these into your sessions and they make your audio sound just so much better. If you have any questions, feel free to hit us up at hello@pukapukacreative.com or on social at Puka Puka Create. All right, and drop it in the comments. Like, what do you want our next video to be all about? What are the problems that you're having in podcasts? What are your frustrations? What do you want to learn? We are here to help you, so drop it in. Until next time, peace.